People, this is Ghana Sem TV, and I am your host, Mr. Sem. If you can please hit the like, share, and especially the subscribe button if you enjoy the content, I would really appreciate it. This helps the channel grow and exposes it to many other people. So if you enjoy the content, please share the video, please like it, and please subscribe. And do not forget to hit that notification button that will remind you when a new video is released. Now today I want to talk a little bit about something that took place 30 years ago, and to really dig into what really happened in this particular case. Now, there was a very popular man, a reverend, a pastor, who went by the name of Pastor Francis Akwesi Amoako. Now, Pastor Francis Akwesi Amoako was one of the most foremost preachers back in the mid to late 80s. He was somebody who preached very powerfully, not only the word of God, but he preached against corruption. He preached against social ills in society, which robbed a lot of people up the wrong way. He was the leader of the church that was based in Kumasi called Resurrection and Living Bread Ministries. And not only was he the pastor of this great and big church in Kumasi that he started, but he conducted crusades all around Ghana. And his whole emphasis was that Ghana should turn back to Christ. Now remember the time in which he is preaching in. He's preaching in the mid to late 80s. And during that time, Ghana was under a dictatorship, the dictatorship of Jerry John Rawlings. And the way this man would preach, he would preach things that would rub people up the wrong way. He would preach against corruption. He would preach against the immoralities that was going on in society, and all sorts of things that really annoyed people and irritated those, especially in government. He would speak out against government. He would speak out against politicians who were doing the wrong thing. He was not afraid to open his mouth. And what made him even more fearless was the fact that at this time, during the mid to late 80s, anyone who would speak out against the government at that time, and if you did it in a very vicarious way, I mean, you went missing. And that was the days that we were living in back then. In those days, if you said anything that was contrary to the government's line, if you criticized the government for any reason, and you did it with such a ferocious voice, you'll be walking around one day, and the next minute you just go missing, or you'll be asked to come to Osu Castle, where government resided at that time, and that will be the last that they will hear of you. And that's what happened in those days, right? So Reverend Francis Amoako, for him to be preaching against government ills and against corruption and actually calling out politicians for the evil that they were doing, he was risking his life. And this was a man that actually knew that he was risking his life, because he said that he was prepared to die for speaking the truth. Okay? So this man's influence is still felt today. I mean, when we talk about some of the premier gospel singers, he was the one that raised them. They saw him as their mentor. And we're talking about the Daughters of Glorious Jesus, and we're talking about the Tego sisters. All right, these were, musical groups and musicians that he raised. There are a lot of pastors and ministers in Ghana right now who are enjoying fruitful ministries, and they can attribute it directly to Reverend Francis Akwesi Amoako. And they refer to him, as they say in Christian circles, as their spiritual father. meaning that he was the one that nurtured them and helped them grow in the things of the church and the ministry. All right? But there's a lot of information about Francis Amoako and his ministry and what he did online. So I'm not going to actually go into the detail of his specific ministry. But what I want to talk about today is how he died. And there's been controversy in relation to how he died. So some people say that it was an accident because what happened was that he died in quotations, a traffic accident. Now there are people that say he died in a traffic accident. It was unfortunate, and it was an accident. And some people say that he was murdered. He was actually targeted and he was murdered. So I want to go into what really happened and find out what happened on that day that Reverend Francis Amoako died. Was it indeed an accident, or was it a premeditated murder? And with the background that I just told you, that Francis Amoako was not a big fan, the government of that time was not a big fan of Francis Amoako. Also, just to put into the back of your mind, the government at that time too didn't really like the church. The government at that time used to fight against the church a lot. They believed in more African religion and things of that nature. They didn't believe in the Christian church. All right. So back then, it's not like today where there's churches everywhere and these politicians will come and some of them join churches and you see, the president at church services. No, it wasn't like that back then. You wouldn't see a cabinet minister or a high-ranking politician in the church service. No, you rather see him, in some of these African religion ceremonies, but you wouldn't see him in the church. And these were some of the things that Francis Amoako would preach against that would really rub these politicians the wrong way. All right, so Francis Amoako didn't have any fans, I would say, in the government, within the government, so to speak. All right, so a little bit of background. Francis Amoako, the week he died, on a Tuesday, he left from Kumasi for a program in Takoradi. So there was a pastor in Takoradi that invited him to come down to Takoradi to hold a couple of days program, a Christian program. He was going there to preach for him for a couple of days. And before then, he had gotten an invitation from a ministry or a pastor in Israel to say that, look, we love your ministry, we like what you're doing, can you please come and visit us in Israel? And he said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So they called, at that time, Israel did not have an embassy in Ghana. So they had called the Foreign Affairs Ministry to inquire as to how they can get a visa. And the Foreign Affairs folks said that, they will get back to them and tell them what to do. So they made their way. They drove down to Takoradi. They got there on Tuesday. They conducted the program with the pastor. And now, according to the testimony of the Tego sisters, because the Tego sisters traveled with him to Takoradi. Now, according to the testimony of the Tego sisters, on Sunday morning, very, very early in the morning, they said around very, very early in the morning, they said that there was a knocking on Reverend Francis Amoako's door. And when he went to open the door, there was no one there. So he thought it was the Tego sisters that were knocking his door. And they said no, they didn't. And they said that he went back into his room and he was studying at the time. Then he heard a knocking again. And the person, turning the doorknob to try and get into his room. So as he saw the doorknob turning, he got up, opened the door this time, but heard the person running downstairs. And it was like they were in a guest house of some kind, and saw him run down the stairs and out of the foyer. And the security person at the time there was asleep, but he didn't actually see the person, but heard the person run out of the building. And the Tego sisters said he went back and he was just kind of like troubled by the whole situation. What is this? What's going on here? So the Monday morning, I think that same weekend, they were told by the Foreign Affairs folks that they can acquire their visa to go to Israel if they came to the Foreign Affairs building, the Foreign Affairs office in Accra, right? So on their way back to Kumasi, they should pass through Accra, get to the Foreign Affairs office by 8 o'clock, and they will sort out their visa for them to get to Israel. So, so the Sunday morning, they got up at 5 o'clock. This is the testimony of the Tego sisters. They got up at 5 o'clock and they went to go and get Francis and Amoako, because the driver was all ready and raring to go. But when they got there, they said that he was sitting there and was in a very contemplative mood, and almost like he was unwilling to leave to go. So they literally had to say, look, time is going, we need to get there by 8, let's leave. So he said it took him some time before he really gathered himself, and got his belongings and left and got into the car. Now, they said that they hit the road at 6:30, and as they were going, the Tego sisters had said that they were singing songs in the car, and one of them fell off. But all of a sudden, she was woken up by the way the driver was driving. And all of them in the car was wondering, and she was wondering, why is the driver driving so erratically, not knowing that there was a military vehicle that was coming towards them. And the driver was trying to sway to get out of the way of this military vehicle. But anytime the driver would sway to the right, the military vehicle would sway to the right. Anytime the military vehicle would sway to the left, anytime the driver would sway to the left, the military vehicle would stray to the left. And what basically happened was that they braced themselves because they knew that this military vehicle was intending to hit them. And this military vehicle came right at them and went right over the vehicle. And as it went right over the vehicle, that's when the Tego sisters in the back braced themselves for the impact. And after it went over the vehicle, they said that they heard Francis Amoako breathe out a couple of times and took his last breath. And the most interesting thing about this story, that is very fascinating, was the fact that a helicopter immediately after the accident came and picked up those who were in the military vehicle and took them away, and left the Tego sisters and Reverend Francis Amoako to die. But miraculously, the Tego sisters survived, but unfortunately, Reverend Francis Amoako died. Now, back then, when I heard the story was Reverend Francis Amoako was killed on his way back from a crusade in Takoradi, and that he died in a traffic accident. And that's all that was said. No details were given. And the thing about it too at that time is that it was so shocking because, number one, Reverend Francis Amoako was only 40 years old. He died March the 26th, 1990, 30 years ago. He was only 40 years old when he died. And so the shock of this young, vibrant, powerful man who affected so many lives and who had such a love for Ghana, because when you hear him preach, you could tell that he's not like a lot of the preachers today, where they're talking about give me money and bring this and bring that. He rather was somebody who liked to give, who liked to reach out to those who were poor, who reach out to those who were needy, and anything that he had would try to, use it to bless other people. He had a love and a passion for Ghana. He could not see the ills of society. He could not see the evils that was going on, and especially being perpetrated by government, going on without saying anything, even though he knew his life was at risk if he said anything. But this man, because of his love for Ghana and for his love for people, he put his life ahead of that. And so the nation was shocked that this voice was no longer there. He was like Ghana's Martin Luther King, to if you want to put it that way. That this voice was no longer there. That this man who was only 40 years old, his life was cut short. But at the same time too, people were not surprised because they kind of knew that the way Francis Amoako was going, that somehow somebody would try an attempt on his life. And some people just said, there you go. They've taken him out. Where other people on the other side would say, no, it's just an accident. They got into a traffic accident. But we didn't know the details of the traffic accident until later when there was an inquiry. Now, there were certain people that were accused of plotting this murder. And there were two individuals whose names came up during an inquiry. A National Reconciliation Commission was put together in Kumasi. And these allegations of two individuals plotting against Francis Amoako came up. The first name was Dr. Lawrence Tete, who was an evangelist, an evangelist in charge of the World Miracle Outreach in London. And the other guy was called Kwabena Dua, who was the leader of a church called International Charismatic Church. And they said that these two fellows were conspirators in killing Francis Amoako because they were part of the PNDC government. Well, not official members, but they were part of some of the inner cliques of the PNDC government. And it was said that the accusation came from Eric Jimmer, the brother of Francis Amoako, that Dr. Lawrence Tete had confessed to him that they plotted the murder of Francis Amoako. But when asked, Dr. Lawrence Tete denied it and said that he had nothing to do with it. He was not part of the plot. He was not part of the conspiracy. In fact, he looked up to Francis Amoako as a spiritual father, that he got converted under his ministry, and that he helped build the church that was in Santasi in Kumasi, and that he had nothing to do with his death. In fact, it will almost be impossible to be part of it because he saw him as a father, whereas on the other side, people were saying that, well, you might be saying that, but the only reason why you got to know Francis Amoako was because of your connections within the PNDC government, and there were certain individuals that knew him, that connected you to him, that allowed the facilitation of this murder. Now, who's telling the truth and who's lying, I don't know. But it's all out there that, this is very unlikely. That it's very unlikely that this was a mere accident. Even if Dr. Tete wasn't involved, and even if this brother Eric Jamar wasn't involved, somebody was involved in taking out the life of Francis Amoako. We might not know it now, but I am very sure that in some time to come, some people will testify as to what really went on. Because the circumstances under which he died are too spooky for us to say that it was just an accident. The testimony of the Tego sisters makes us understand that this military vehicle, I mean, can you imagine? It was on the road at the same time that the pastor was going to Accra. And this military vehicle was hell-bent on hitting this vehicle, because somehow they knew who was in the vehicle. Okay? J.J. Rollins denied any knowledge of of any plots to kill him. Of course, who's going to come out and admit it? Nobody's going to come out and admit it. Am I saying that he's directly involved? I don't know. Am I saying that the directions came from him? I don't know. Am I saying that he even knew about it? I don't know. But somebody knew. Somebody took action. Somebody gave directions. And I believe that this was not just a mere accident, but this was an actual murder. Now the question is, who did it? Who's responsible? That is the question. And I believe that the same God that Francis Amoako served, that same God one day will reveal what really happened. But blessed memory of this great pastor who left such a great legacy. All I can say is that the love that he had for Ghana is the same love that we should have. The same intolerance for injustice and evil and all that is going on in our country that doesn't edify our country is the same passion and love that we should have. The same way he reached out to other people to help them and blessed them and gave what little he had to help them, is the same way we should take what little we have to help others. Not like today where we're taking the little that, the people have to add to the mass that they have. But he took the little that he had to give to the little that they had. This was a great man indeed. And I know that justice one day will be fulfilled. Okay, so once again, if you enjoyed the content, please share, like, and subscribe. Be safe, take care, until next time.